After exposures in recent years, 2021 has seen another big Legacy of Kain reveal, with the public unveiling of the Soul Reaver 2 beta version. Unlike previous alpha and beta releases, this was much more public in nature, and thanks to the efforts of Hidden Palace's Project Deluge and one anonymous contributor, a vast cache of PS2 prototypes was uncovered, including the Soul Reaver 2 beta. In contrast to the Soul Reaver and Blood Omen alphas, the Soul Reaver 2 beta is much more complete and has fewer big cuts, making its developmental version a lot more succinct and its cuts lower key. We've already put up some videos focusing on some of the more important parts of the build, and Rainer Ordrin has a full walkthrough where some of this can be seen, but let's explain some of the highlights. For starters, as with other developmental builds, this build can be quite unstable and has a lot of content that is unfinished and doesn't function correctly as it would in the retail version, which can often lead to crashes, glitches, or other unexpected behaviours. In terms of build date, this version of the game was created a few days after the Soul Reaver 2 Airforge demo, so a lot of its features are similar to those in the demo. Like the Soul Reaver alphas, the graphics of the Soul Reaver 2 beta do appear to be slightly better than the retail version, where it's apparently been toned down to optimise loading for consoles. Environments are generally brighter than the retail version, with less lighting and fog effects. The game begins with the Raziel's Soul Reaver 2 logo animation that appeared in the Airforge demos. The options section background on the title screen is different with more purple tones. The cheats section only includes the debug menu power to turn off enemies, which incidentally doesn't work. The extras section features a photo of programmers Jason Bell, Scott Krotz and Hong Park from the Electronic Gaming Magazine preview of Soul Reaver 1. These three would incidentally go on to feature as villagers in the Heart of Darkness mural in the retail release. Most of the extras are not present at this time and have a placeholder cinematic instead, and only the Soul Reaver 1 intro can be played. There are no major cut areas featured in the build. Soul Reaver 2's developmental process was a lot more streamlined than previous games, with most cut areas being left out before formal development work began, although in some areas there are potential gaps which could have been left open for potential extra areas to be slotted in. Several entries in the debug menu exist which describe unknown level areas, including several push, demo and movie areas, but these cannot be accessed and indicate the relevant files are not even present in the game. The names appear to be identical to entries from Soul Reaver 1, suggesting they were simply copied across and the rooms never physically existed in Soul Reaver 2. Similarly, there are several areas which are seen only in certain time periods in Soul Reaver 2 that are nevertheless listed as belonging to separate time periods as well in the beta. Again, the entries crash and indicate the files are not present, perhaps suggesting areas where the rooms have been copied and modified to create different time periods, and those areas were not necessarily expected to be available in other times. Some icons are changed in the HUD, with the compass in the same gold and blue colours seen in the Airforge demo. Similarly, a cross swords icon is present that indicates combat. This is also seen in the Airforge demo. Debug messages also occasionally pop up on screen, some with somewhat humorous messages. The game map is notably scrambled, but can be unscrambled to show a game map that is similar but subtly different to the retail version. The overall map area is slightly larger, and the individual level area indicators are shown with somewhat different shapes and some interesting anomalies. The compass rose in the map screen is also a different design to the retail version. As with locations, the Soul Reaver 2 beta doesn't contain any extra abilities or weapons per se, and those that are here appear to be leftovers from Soul Reaver 1. Constrict is still present in the menu but doesn't function. Some of the finishing moves from Soul Reaver 1 are still present in this version, including the charged Reaver attack. Soul Reaver 1 rules for Wraithblade apply by default. When the Wraithblade consumes souls, it lowers the level of the Reaver bar, unlike in Retail, which continues to build. Projectiles can be fired underwater, a feature which was disabled in the Retail game. Torches don't go out after a single use, and flame effects give a much brighter effect on its surroundings. Also, a thrown torch is a one-hit kill. Another thing that was present in Soul Reaver 1 alphas and betas is the walk on air, which allows us to explore beyond the normal bounds of the game. The ring menu is the same as the Retail version, and doesn't feature any of the placeholder spaces that appear in the Airforge demo. As with the Retail version, the deleted pillar glyphs can be seen in the debug menus, but activating them does nothing. Only by summoning the Reaver from the ring menu, you can hear the summoning sound effect, which is slightly different from the final build. As with the Retail version and the Airforge demo, the deleted Earth, Water and Spirit Reavers can be found in the debug menus. The projectiles of the Spirit Reaver notably have a different effect, potentially an indicator for the deleted Hookshot ability, which uses regular handheld TK effect as a placeholder. All of the Reaver variants, including the basic Spectral and Material versions, have different colour schemes in the opposite plane, though this would be removed for Retail since they generally exist in one realm only. As with early versions of Soul Reaver 1, the Spectral Realm in Soul Reaver 2 beta is much brighter and more colourful, although it seems to be a bit more structured than the lighting seen in the Soul Reaver prototypes. As with Soul Reaver, the effect is toned down to a muted blue, green and purple tones by the Retail game. This is probably to do with vertex lighting displaying incorrectly rather than the experimentation seen in the Soul Reaver prototypes. Planar portals have a slight design change. Again, the design concentrates more on the swirling background than the pulsing rings. This is also seen in the Soul Reaver prototypes, and the single portal that is seen at the start of Defiance. While the enemies appear to be largely the same, some of their appearances are slightly different, with some bearing subtly different colours or lighting, and others wearing completely different clothing. The Sarafan sorceresses, for example, wear colourful attire that appears to be a t-shirt and bikini. Enemies deal more damage to Raziel, and the targeting system seems off, with it much harder to hit enemies in return. Some enemies are placed in different locations, with a notable increase in the verticality, with a number of projectile firing enemies positioned on high ledges that are inaccessible and uninhabited in the Retail game. Thralls that carry emblem key shields will hold them on their backs rather than use them as shields, and the keys themselves can be incorrectly inserted when they're used to open doors. Groundlings, which were rare and barely seen in the Retail version, are more frequent in this version, and multiple groundlings can spawn at once. Most of the cutscenes don't function as in the final game. Some feature a very Soul Reaver 1 reminiscent scene where the character's lips don't move and the emotions of the scenes are conveyed through gesture. Some do not have completed dialogue and instead play back a placeholder audio that effectively tells the listener that it's placeholder audio. Some of the dialogue is clearly alternate takes or lacks effects or appears in the wrong place entirely. Camera angles can be different and cutscene triggers can be in different places. Some scenes feature the characters moving in unexpected ways, such as different animations, sped up motion, repeated actions, generic T-model poses, or no motion or action at all.
I know you're there, President.
Mobius led me to you, Kane. I might have guessed you'd meet me here.
In Sarafan Stronghold, there's no water or visions in the Gathering Room pool. William's Chapel has early, simpler versions of the Heart of Darkness and Cain vs William murals, usually found there, with brighter colours and backgrounds. William's sarcophagus is more decorative, with blood script reading William on the side. The chapter house, which usually houses the Sarafan commander's mural and statue, has only blank walls, although there is a previously unknown blood script marking on the wall which reads Chapter House. The wheel to exit the Stronghold Lake area has a different texture, and the ruins of the Spirit Forge seen in the lake remain in the same state as the retail version. In the second era, the Circle's Gathering Room murals of Vorador appear incomplete, despite being completed in the first era. Some show placeholders suggesting that they've not yet been copied across. One mural, the martyred Dimension Guardian seen in Blood Omen, is actually shown with a placeholder of the late Sean Connery. According to the commentary by Daniel Kabuko, after he designed the mural, it would be discovered that he left a Guardian out, so the young apprentice Guardian of the Mind would be added alongside the Dimension Guardian. In the earlier era, this mural is already appeared complete with both Guardians present. Throughout the era, the banners of Mobius's army are still rendered as complete and not reduced to tatters as in the retail version. Combat barriers notably have a more basic design, appearing as more transparent with more honeycomb or crisscross shaped energy, rather than the more solid clouds seen in the retail game. Some are also different colours. William's Chapel in this era had a more plain look, with no sarcophagus and no murals. In their place was a series of patterned placeholder murals, with annotations indicating their intended final content. Some could be seen in the previous eras, including Mural of the Murder of Janos and Mural of William and Cain. But one stuck out as not being seen at all. A mirrored scroll reading Mural of Mobius and Vampires. Though present, Mobius's statue lacks the Latin inscription, and Mobius's spectre appears in the Sanctuary Cathedral area rather than the nearby antechamber. The spectre is visually identical to the regular Mobius. In the third era, the ice surrounding the Stronghold is not completely finished and can be swum under all the way where only a small section is present in the retail. This means that Raziel can make it to the lake door, which has nothing behind it and appears glitched or incorrectly fitted. Upon entering the Stronghold, the Mobius cutscenes feature only placeholder audio, with no other characters making an appearance. The final battles against the Sarafan lieutenants all have placeholder, incorrect or reused audio introductions, and the battles themselves are much easier. They rarely block and are much easier to hit. The lieutenants seem to be copied from ordinary Sarafan warriors, with unfinished flare pieces stuck in a manner that resembles cardboard cutouts. The commanders can be finished with regular finishing moves such as decapitations, and their souls can be consumed, neither of which is permitted in the retail version. William's Chapel is much plainer in this era, with only the Mural of William and Cain scroll appearing, incorrectly it must be said. Strangely enough, a motionless model of Cain is present in the area, suggesting it was copied from the initial era. The return to the chapter house reveals another pair of Cains, along with an earlier design for the Sarafan Raziel, with a subtly different helmet. It is possible to trigger some alternate dialogue and different takes of the final scene here, some of which would go on to be used in Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light Raziel and Cain DLC. More vampire corpses can be seen along the pillars pathway than the retail version. Some patches of wall appear darkened, although the levels are generally brighter than the retail versions. Crows can be seen throughout, but they either remain still or are able to fly, unlike the retail version where approaching them causes them to rise away and dissipate, an indication that they are agents or extensions of Vorador. Several brief cutscenes down the trail further highlight the crow's presence without comment. The sky and weather conditions change abruptly as you cross a bridge on the approach to the pillars. Cross-shaped monoliths can be seen along the trail, which are replaced in retail by regular domed pillars. The cross monolith goes on to be used in the Lightforge in retail. Textures around the pillar's gate are different, and a single cannoneer is actually positioned atop the pillar's gate. Perhaps the biggest change in this section is the presence of two vampires on the trail. One a fully textured female, the other an untextured male, who acknowledge and retreat from Raziel, claiming he's not one of them. These vampires were previously known in the community thanks to their appearances in bonus materials, which shows the male fully. The female vampire was even present in the retail version, where her model could be found behind a wall just before the pillars. Even earlier versions of these characters can be seen in artist sketches. Further along the trail, Raziel catches up with the vampires again, and finds the female pinned down and executed by the vampire hunters, using a combination of dialogue which could be found in the code of the retail version of the game. Like a later vampire appearance, the dialogue for these scenes was deemed imperfect, and it was felt it tipped the balance of players' sympathies too soon. In the second era, the pillars exhibit much of the same trademarks, but unlike the retail version, none of the torches along the trail are lit. In the pillars clearing, the flame effects are greater than their retail counterparts, and the pillars themselves have a more basic and more uniform grey colour. But the biggest change is Ariel's nightmare fuel appearance. She appears with flowing blonde locks, a blue dress, and a white blouse with a human face on the front and back. This appears to be a reference to the 90s TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, with Ariel dressed as Buffy, and the face being a digitised version of Charisma Carpenter's Cordelia Chase. One interesting aspect of this scene is that it takes place entirely in the material realm, and Raziel doesn't follow Ariel into Spectral as he does in the final scene, and the sound effects are less distinctive because of this. The fire demon fight following Ariel's meeting is also missing. In the third era, the snow is heavier than the retail version, and the snow effects are more widespread, with snow seen settling along the trail. The door to the subterranean ruins bears a subtly different mural, with the hands raised where they were seen down in the retail version. The murals in the subterranean pillars chamber are only seen on half of the walls, and consist of placeholders and much simpler versions of the war scenes, all marked with banners indicating they are temporary. In the second era, the Elder God doesn't occupy as much of the chamber, despite having the same size, with it appearing he may be incomplete. In Spectral, he doesn't move at all. In the retail version, the swamp was known to have a number of high platforms which had some collision, suggesting they could be stood on or used, and this, along with concepts of an Ewok-style village in the trees, was thought to potentially offer the possibility of high jumping routes through to other areas. The beta, unfortunately, doesn't show much evidence of this. There are a few extra platforms, but in the beta these seem to be used as places for extra cannoneers to stand on and fire projectiles from. One high platform does feature a notable gap that could indicate a doorway to another area or route considered for extra areas, but it may also be just an incorrectly fitted texture. Although no high platforms can be used, one potential missing hint can be seen in the swamp, as when he has the Air Reaver equipped, Raziel can glide further in the high areas of the swamp, and this may match up to suggestions of removed updrafts in developer comments. In the beta, humans are incredibly fragile to swamp conditions and will die upon contact with swampy water. The first area of the swamp also features 2 squeaking flying birds near the middle area and a bird sitting and occasionally flying off near the air elemental form. When he initially appears, Vorador seems to have an extra chin scratch animation. In the second era, as Raziel emerges in the swamp, he's greeted by a cutscene with placeholder audio which focuses on the mutants, suggested they were intended to get an in-game explanation. No such scene is present in retail, and the only vague explanation of them comes from the manual which describes them as evolving after the collapse of the pillars. In the return to the time streaming chamber after completing the Airforge, Raziel physically inserts the Reaver into the device, rather than turning it with his hands, and the roof of the structure resembles a flowing green goo, rather than the undulating starry sky seen in retail. This was presumably changed to match the appearance of the chronoplast. In the third time period, the swamp is notably more green than the wintry white-grey shades seen in the retail, and more closely resembles the first time period. The snow is much heavier in the beta than the retail, and this continues into the mountains. At the end of the swamp, an unfinished air plinth can be seen with a notable square surrounding it. Above it comes another one of the beta's big surprises, a second vampire encounter. An encounter in the Ewok village was known to have existed at one point, but it was suggested that it was added as a replacement for the Pillars vampire scene after that was cut, only for this scene to meet a similar fate. This version provides evidence that both scenes coexisted for a time. Here, as with the earlier vampires scene, a pair of vampires survey the killing fields of the Sarafan and notice Raziel. But unsure of what he is, they retreat further into the mountains. Attempts to follow them like the previous vampires prove fruitless, as the next room introduces the Sarafan camp, a scene which is seen in the retail version. But it promptly crashes. It is possible to modify and play the scene, but it appears identical to the retail version, with no trace of the vampires. The order perhaps suggests that, like the previous scene, they would have run into the Sarafan and met their end, but this was unfinished. In the Dark Forge, some entrances can be difficult to make out, so torches have been added in later versions. Beyond this, the Forge is largely identical to the retail version, although the activation cutscene is much more dramatic here with more visual effects. An extra cutscene plays upon Raziel's return to the Sarafan Stronghold from the Dark Forge, showing the lake dock doors closing and highlighting the light crystal above them. Vorador's cutscene is present, however Vorador himself is not animated, and is only seen as a T-posed model. Some of the dialogue uses alternate takes.
You're a ragged excuse for a savior.
Vorador.
I see my reputation precedes me.
It does.
All good, I hope? I've been watching you since you emerged from that accursed stronghold. Strange that your arrival coincides with the corruption of the Pillars. But I'm wondering, are you the catalyst of these events, or the answer to them?
I don't know what you mean.
I will speak plainly then. I distrust your origin, stranger. Seeing you crawl from the putrid depths of Mobius's keep makes me question your purpose here. And what should I make of your appearance? Not human, clearly, and more demon than vampire. And the Pillars. It is no mere coincidence that your arrival in that clearing heralded the Pillars' decay. And so I ask you plainly, are you the instrument of the Pillars' destruction or their salvation?
Neither.
Very well. Let us look at the other side of the coin. I have followed your journey and watched as you blithely unlocked secrets that have been sealed and forbidden for thousands of years. The path you have been treading is open to only one being. You don't know what you are, do you?
I have been many things. If you find me ignorant, enlighten me.
What's the point? This world is beyond redemption. Let the human cattle have it.
I would expect better than meek capitulation from you.
Centuries of persecution have taught me well. 500 years ago, our race was nearly exterminated by the fanatical crusades of the Sarafan. And now the same sick drama unfolds again. In merely a decade, Mobius's cutthroat citizen army has nearly accomplished what the Sarafan could not. Vampires meddling in the affairs of men. Look where it's brought us.
What am I to make of these secrets I've uncovered, then? The depictions of the winged race, the Pillars, and the Reaver.
Fairy tales, boy. The delusions of an ancient culture, clinging to hope long after the world has discarded them. Their bloodline trickled away, until only one of the ancients remained, sustained solely by obligation and his unfaltering faith in the old prophecies. But even if you are who you appear to be, it no longer matters. You're simply too late. Janos, the Reaver Guardian, the last of the ancients and my maker, was murdered by the Sarafan nearly 5 centuries ago. He alone would have the answers you seek, but his secrets died with him. I don't know how you've come even this far without his guidance, or without the Reaver, stolen these 500 years ago by the Sarafan. I'm afraid, my friend, that you, and all of us, are out of luck.
In the Light Forge, the explanatory murals are again replaced by simplified placeholders, marked by banners. Early versions of murals from elsewhere in the Light Forge were also used in the scene. The sentry eyes seen from here on have a slightly different effect, with a whiter sclera, more yellow iris, and a redder pupil compared to the yellow, blue, black seen in the retail version. They're also more sensitive to Raziel's presence. Once the Light Forge key has been gained, the thralls don't retreat correctly and can attack, whereas in retail they will return beneath ground upon Raziel's approach. The Lightforge statue has no crystals in its hands in the beta. The Lightforge main room door also has a placeholder mural featuring a picture of Daniel Kabuko's car. After Raziel returns to the Stronghold and meets Kain there is no Mobius scene, and Raziel appears to activate the time streaming chamber on his own, with a differently textured dial suggesting movement. As with the swamp, the Ruthsome ledges in Uschtenheim and its nearby mountain passes were also known to have remnants of a high jumping puzzle, and paths that may have led to other locations. But also, as with the swamp, there's little to indicate them in the beta. Developer commentary had suggested that there were at one stage updrafts along the route to help reach high platforms in the area, but they were abandoned due to causing game-breaking bugs. Unfortunately, there's no evidence of those in the beta either. However, like the swamp, there are some potential candidates for areas that could possibly have slotted on, including a gap at the top of a waterfall, which could, if Defiance's Reaver powers were followed, have been climbed with the aid of the Water Reaver, although this could again equally just be a missed texture or similar issue. The Airforge in this build is very similar to that seen in the Airforge demo, with this beta created only a few days after the creation of the Airforge demo builds. Again, the Airforge here is dominated by a large moon that looms over the forge and can be seen to have cracks and canyons in the Spectral Realm, rather than the stars and swirling winds seen in the retail version. The Airforge has the same simplified placeholder murals as seen in other forges in areas that deal with the events of the ancient wars. This time the label points out that the counter curse should be explained here. One of the mummies has an unfinished restored appearance, and at one point a bird model from the swamp can be seen on the platforms Raziel passes by. The final activation of the Airforge is a lot simpler in the beta, and much more elaborate effects are seen in the retail version. The final doorway to leave the forge is replaced by a cracked barrier in retail to allow Raziel to test his new powers, but in the beta it remains a grated barrier which must be phased through. In the second and third eras, the exterior lake area of Janos Ordering's retreat appears much the same, with a few exceptions.
Oh no. Every time you turn up, something monumental and terrible happens. I don't think I have the stomach for it.
No drama this time, Raziel.
You are persistent, crossing time like this to follow me. Still waiting for that coin of yours to land on its edge.
I'm biding my time. I see that Mobius has played a little trick on you.
Yes, he clearly doesn't want me to meet this Janos Ordering.
Perhaps.
Beneath the surface there's a completely different entry to the retreat to be found. Here, instead of a long passage in the Spectral Realm that was obviously decorated by the ancient vampires, Raziel instead has to blast his way through a cracked barrier to gain entry to a more natural underwater snowy cave with a ceiling made of a notable transparent ice, which Raziel will walk over the top of when he blasts open the shortcut to the dark font outside later on. As Raziel enters the underwater passage, a cutscene shows an earthquake triggering and rocks falling to block his path back, and he eventually emerges through a much plainer opening into the interior of the retreat. The puzzle inside the retreat is much the same as in retail, although there are notably early designs for light crystals in the area, looking like ordinary lanterns, and the different sentry eye colouring that has been seen elsewhere. Some elements of the puzzle do not function correctly, with thralls occasionally freezing, light bridges getting stuck, element keys not necessarily lining up correctly, or the keyhole being missing entirely, and Raziel, of course, turning the blood chalices upside down when he carries them. As Raziel reaches Janos' chamber, the beta is again missing some particles, and the effect used when Raziel opens the door is somewhat different to retail, with the corridor behind much brighter and lacking the purple lighting seen in retail. In contrast to the retail version, the player has to physically walk down the following corridors, which are done in cutscene in retail. The Janos cutscene is notably different, as Janos is not present at all, and the entire audio plays out with Raziel staring at an empty bench with a fixed camera, before Raziel is transported to the Fireforge. The room can be explored, and this reveals that the Reaver box texture is notably scrambled and different from the retail version, and a number of Sarafan weapons are already present in the scene. Entry to the Fire Forge automatically plays placeholder audio and warps Raziel to the first brazier in the puzzle.
Soul Reaver 2 voiceover placeholder. Soul Reaver 2 voiceover placeholder.
The puzzle itself is much the same as in retail, but is not entirely functional, with some elements not necessarily working correctly. Upon activation, Raziel lights the forge as if it were a regular brazier, and then has to manually drop the torch, equip the Reaver and plunge it into the font, which has no visible effects, to imbue the Reaver. In retail, this sequence is much more elaborate and epic, is entirely automatic, and finishes with the statue bearing the flaming Reaver, a feature which is missing from the beta.
I plunged the Reaver into that furnace and forged the blade with elemental fire. With the Reaver thus imbued, I was now armed to unlock the elemental barrier and rescue Janos from his executioners.
Raziel's return to Janos' room uses a much slower, more generic forge exit cutscene, showing the forge being sealed after him, and also shows two large braziers flanking the entrance. The scene of Janos' death unfortunately crashes the game, and this in turn means that demons do not spawn on the way back to the Stronghold, save for one in the subterranean ruins that also spawns multiple groundlings.